The Sterling Club in Manhattan glowed like a jewel against the night. Golden chandeliers hung above velvet carpets, and polished mahogany reflected the light in warm tones. Waiters glided silently with trays of champagne, their movements practiced, while conversations overlapped in a steady rhythm of wealth and pride. In this place, power was never spoken directly. It was displayed in gestures, brands, and the games people played to remind others who they were. At the center of the lounge, a marble chessboard waited. The board was more than a pastime. It was a stage, a symbol, and tonight it belonged to Faisal al-Hariri. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a navy suit that cost more than most people's yearly rent, Faisal carried himself with the casual arrogance of a man used to dominance. He was a millionaire from birth, the son of oil magnates, and his wealth gave him license to sneer. Around him sat an eager circle of admirers, men who wanted to stay close to his money and women who wanted to be noticed by his gaze. Chess, to Faisal, was simply another chance to perform. He moved the pieces quickly, slamming pawns and knights down with a flair that had little to do with skill and everything to do with control. His current opponent, a red-faced broker already sweating, struggled to hold composure. Faisal leaned back in his chair, flashing a grin. "You see, gentlemen," he declared, "chess is not for dreamers. It is for men with vision. Men like me." The crowd chuckled, eager to please. The broker fumbled, knocked over his rook, and the laughter grew louder. The sound echoed through the lounge like the chime of expensive crystal, cold and mocking. Near the edges of the room, Marcus Johnson stood quietly. His shirt was ironed but worn, the collar softened from too many washes, and his shoes scuffed from long walks across Queens. He wasn't a guest of this glittering world. He had only come to wait for his mother, who had worked late cleaning the private suites upstairs. Marcus moved unnoticed most of the time, his presence blending into the background of service staff and invisible labor. But tonight, something shifted. Faisal's sharp eyes caught sight of him. "Ah," Faisal said suddenly, raising his voice so the entire room could hear, "the maid's boy arrives." "Tell me, child, do you know anything about real games, or is dusting tables your only skill?" Laughter erupted again. This time Marcus felt every note pierce through him. He had heard it before, on school playgrounds when kids mocked his shoes, in supermarkets when his mother's accent slipped in front of cashiers, and in classrooms when he dared to answer questions with more confidence than expected. For a moment, he considered walking away, but something inside him refused. He stepped forward, his voice calm, steady, carrying weight beyond the ridicule that surrounded him. "I can beat you in chess." The lounge froze. For a heartbeat, there was silence, as though the chandeliers themselves had stopped glowing. Then came the explosion of laughter, harsher and louder than before. Men slapped their knees, women smirked behind manicured nails. The broker, relieved to be out of focus, chuckled nervously. Faisal leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, the grin never leaving his lips. "You, the maid's son. Do you even know the difference between a pawn and a knight?" "I know enough," Marcus replied. His voice didn't tremble, his gaze didn't drop. A murmur rippled through the room. For the first time, people weren't only laughing. Some tilted their heads, curious. There was something unsettling about the young man's certainty, something that didn't match his plain clothes or his position at the margins of the club. Faisal snapped his fingers, gesturing at the chair opposite him. "Sit. Let us all enjoy this comedy." Marcus did not hesitate. And before a single move was made, before pieces touched the board, the battle lines were already drawn. Pride, dignity, and arrogance had collided, and the outcome promised to be unforgettable. So pause here with me. What happens when a man born into nothing dares to challenge a millionaire in his own arena? This is not just a game. This is a fight for respect. Subscribe now because you won't want to miss a single move. Marcus Johnson was born in Queens, in a small apartment where walls carried the smell of cleaning supplies and fried food, where every corner held proof of survival. His mother, Evelyn, worked endlessly as a maid in wealthy homes scattered across Manhattan. From sunrise until late at night, she scrubbed floors and polished marble counters that were never hers to enjoy. Her hands were always red and cracked, yet her voice remained soft when she spoke to Marcus. "Baby," she often told him, "don't let anyone tell you where you belong. You decide that yourself." It was Evelyn's strength that kept the family together after Marcus's father left when he was only 4. His father's absence left silence rather than scars, silence filled by his grandfather, Samuel Johnson, a retired postal worker who lived a few blocks away. Samuel stepped in not as a replacement, but as a steady presence, bringing Marcus into a world that Evelyn's long hours kept her from fully sharing. One afternoon, when Marcus was 7, Samuel placed a worn wooden chessboard on the kitchen table. The pieces were mismatched, some chipped, a rook borrowed from another set, a knight missing part of its horse's head. To Marcus, it looked like treasure. "What's this?" he asked, eyes wide. "It's a battlefield," Samuel said with a grin. "Every man has to learn how to fight, but not all battles use fists. This one is for the mind." The first game lasted only 5 minutes. Samuel swept Marcus's king off the board with such ease that the boy nearly burst into tears. But Samuel reached across the table, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't quit, the board remembers. Every mistake you make now teaches you how to win later." Those words stuck. From that day, chess became Marcus's anchor. While other kids played ball in the streets, he sat at the community center with his grandfather, studying moves from old books the librarians kept on dusty shelves. The pages smelled of age, the diagrams faded, but Marcus devoured them. He learned openings, endgames, the subtle balance between patience and aggression. Still, his journey wasn't smooth. His neighborhood didn't see chess as a path to anything. Friends teased him. "Man, why are you always sitting with old folks pushing pieces around? Come outside, shoot some hoops." Marcus laughed along but never quit. Something about the game gave him peace, a sense of control in a life where so much seemed stacked against him. At school, things were harder. Kids noticed the difference between his thrift store clothes and their brand new sneakers. Some mocked the way his mother arrived in her maid's uniform when she picked him up. Marcus clenched his fists in silence, learning early that dignity sometimes meant swallowing the urge to respond. At home, he let it out over the chessboard, pouring every frustration into strategies and counters. Evelyn noticed. She didn't fully understand the game, but she recognized the fire in her son's eyes whenever he played. Some nights, when she returned exhausted, she would watch him set up the pieces on the kitchen table and smile faintly. "Keep going, baby. Maybe this game will open doors that money can't." Marcus grew sharper with each year. By middle school, he was already beating older players at the community center. Men decades older shook their heads, muttering, "Kid's got vision." Samuel beamed with pride, but he also warned him, "The world won't care how smart you are, Marcus. They'll see where you come from first, so you'll have to fight twice as hard." Those words, too, stayed with him. It was in those years that Marcus built not only skill but resilience. Every loss, every mocking laugh at his patched-up shoes, every sideways glance at his mother's uniform became fuel. He understood deep down that chess was more than a game. It was a language of survival, a mirror of his life, limited resources, underestimated beginnings, but with strategy and patience, victory always possible. And as Marcus sat at that kitchen table under the dim yellow light, guiding pawns forward with small fingers, he promised himself, someday he would prove what his grandfather had told him, that the board remembers, and so does he. By the time Marcus entered high school, the chessboard was no longer just a curiosity. It was his second home. The battered wooden set his grandfather had gifted him still sat on the kitchen table, but now Marcus carried a pocket-sized plastic one in his backpack, pulling it out between classes or during lunch breaks. Other kids flipped through magazines or tossed footballs in the yard. Marcus traced lines of knights and bishops, replaying games he had studied late at night. One afternoon, his math teacher, Mr. Lewis, noticed him. "Johnson," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you ever think about joining the school's chess club?" Marcus hesitated. He had heard rumors about the club, mostly kids from better-off families, wearing clean sneakers and carrying polished boards in velvet bags. Still, something in Mr. Lewis's tone urged him to try. The next week, Marcus showed up, clutching his cheap plastic set. The room fell quiet when he entered. A boy with a designer jacket muttered under his breath, "What's he doing here?" Another smirked, pointing at Marcus's taped-up backpack. Marcus ignored them and sat down. The coach, a stern woman named Mrs. Whitaker, nodded at him. "Sit. Show me what you've got." The game that followed silenced the room. Marcus dismantled his opponent in 20 moves, his hands steady, his eyes unblinking. When the checkmate came, a hush spread across the table. One of the wealthier kids scoffed, "Beginner's luck." But when Marcus repeated the feat against a second, then a third player, whispers started. Still, acceptance didn't come easily. Between matches, the same kids who had mocked him whispered insults about his clothes or snickered at the way he packed up his pieces in a cracked box. But on the board, their laughter always died. Marcus learned to let his victories speak louder than his words. At home, he told his grandfather about his first victories. Samuel grinned wide, pride shining in his tired eyes. "You see? The board doesn't care about money or clothes. It cares about patience and courage." Evelyn listened quietly from the kitchen, her hands still raw from bleach. She didn't always understand the strategies her son described, but she understood the light in his voice. For her, that was enough. As weeks passed, Marcus grew bolder. He began entering local tournaments, the kind hosted in dusty community halls or cramped back rooms of libraries. The prizes were small, sometimes a plastic trophy, sometimes a $50 check. But Marcus didn't care. What mattered were the opponents, veterans who had played for decades, kids sharper than him, men who thought they couldn't be beaten. In those tournaments, Marcus learned humility. He lost as often as he won, but every loss became fuel. He carried a small notebook, scribbling positions, analyzing mistakes, replaying matches until he understood where his strategy faltered. Late at night, while his mother slept after a long shift, Marcus sat by the dim lamp whispering moves to himself, practicing patience. It was at one of these tournaments that he met Mr. Reynolds, a retired math professor with a sharp gaze and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. Reynolds watched Marcus play 3 games in a row, leaning quietly on his cane. After the third match, he approached him. "You think 3 moves ahead," Reynolds said, his voice gravelly. "But champions think 10. Marcus blinked. "And how do I learn that?" Reynolds smiled faintly. "By losing more. By studying more. And by listening." From that day forward, Reynolds became a mentor of sorts. He never offered easy praise, but his advice cut through Marcus's pride like a blade. "Don't rush," he would say. "Don't play for applause. Play for control." Those words reshaped Marcus's style. He began slowing down, seeing patterns others missed. He grew calmer, more deliberate, his strategies unsettling opponents who relied on brute force or flashy moves. The board, once a place of simple battles, became a canvas where Marcus painted patience. Yet, for all his growth, whispers of doubt still haunted him. On the subway rides home, he overheard classmates mocking his mother's job. In the hallways, kids laughed at his frayed shoes. Marcus clenched his jaw, pushing it all into his determination. He couldn't change where he came from, but he could sharpen his mind until no one could deny his brilliance. And though victories stacked slowly, Marcus knew he was building towards something greater. Every move, every sacrifice, every hard-earned win was one step closer to proving that the boy who came from nothing could stand against anyone. While Marcus's life unfolded in quiet apartments and crowded subways, Faisal al-Hariri's world glittered with extravagance. Born in Dubai, raised between palaces and international schools, he grew up in a cocoon of wealth. His family's empire stretched across oil, real estate, and luxury investments. Wherever he went, doors opened, not because of who he was, but because of what his last name represented. By the time he was 20, Faisal was already infamous in elite circles of New York. He had inherited not only money, but the desire to flaunt it. Luxury cars purred at his command, penthouses gleamed under his ownership, and every party he attended became a theater, where he played the star. If Marcus's clothes told stories of endurance, Faisal's tailored suits screamed victory without effort. Yet beneath the tailored perfection, Faisal carried a gnawing emptiness. The world never told him no. Every voice around him echoed his own arrogance. Friends laughed too loudly at his jokes. Women admired him for his wealth long before his words. Businessmen flattered him, hoping for a slice of his influence. He was never challenged, never tested. Chess became one of his indulgences. To him, the game wasn't a passion or a discipline. It was a convenient tool to showcase superiority. Surrounded by lackeys, he played recklessly, winning just enough to keep his pride intact. And when he lost, his opponents rarely dared to gloat. They valued his favor more than their own victories. "Another checkmate," he would say, slamming a queen down with a flourish even when the match had been sloppy. And the crowd clapped, never correcting him. Arrogance for Faisal was air. He inhaled it daily, exhaled it freely. But arrogance has a cost, one he never considered. It was during one of his first months in Manhattan that he hired Evelyn Johnson, Marcus's mother, as part of his housekeeping staff. For Evelyn, it was just another job, another mansion to dust, another endless list of demands. For Faisal, she was invisible, a shadow who polished glass tables and disappeared before guests arrived. "Make sure the floor shines," he would bark without looking at her, "and don't leave streaks on the windows." Evelyn, used to such dismissals, bit her tongue and kept her dignity. She needed the paycheck, not his respect. On rare occasions, Marcus accompanied her to help carry supplies or wait until she finished. The contrast struck him deeply. Gold chandeliers above, marble beneath, and a young millionaire lounging with friends who cheered every careless joke. Marcus noticed how easily people gave power to arrogance when wealth supported it. For Faisal, wealth had turned into a mask. He convinced himself that people admired his brilliance, when in truth they admired his bank account. Still, he clung to the illusion, demanding it wherever he went. "Life is a board," Faisal often told his entourage, "and I was born with the queen in my hand. Others, their pawns, disposable, replaceable." His friends laughed, nodding, though some exchanged uneasy glances. Deep down, a few of them recognized that Faisal's pride wasn't backed by true skill. He was good at belittling, good at mocking, but untested where it mattered. Yet none dared to tell him so. He liked New York because it fed his ego. Exclusive clubs welcomed him. Bankers sought his investments. Models flocked to his parties. And yet, when the music ended and the lights dimmed, he often found himself staring out of penthouse windows, wondering why satisfaction always slipped away. Arrogance made him powerful in appearance, but hollow inside. And so, when Marcus stepped into his world, quiet, steady, unafraid, it touched something Faisal didn't expect. He saw not just the son of a maid, but an interruption to the performance he had built around himself. The mockery he threw at Marcus that evening wasn't only instinct, it was defense. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him without fear, and that simple look would become the spark that lit the fire of confrontation neither of them could avoid. The Sterling Club always seemed insulated from the struggles of the outside world. Its walls were lined with portraits of old tycoons, its halls echoed with polished laughter, and its tables bore the weight of deals sealed with a handshake. On one particular evening, however, the air carried something sharper than luxury. Faisal al-Hariri sat at his usual corner table, his entourage clustered around him like planets orbiting a sun. A chessboard glimmered between glasses of expensive cognac. The game itself didn't matter much. Faisal's moves were flamboyant, reckless, designed to impress more than to win. Yet the men surrounding him leaned forward as if watching a grand master at work. He slammed a piece down with theatrical force. "Check," he boomed, flashing his teeth in a grin. His opponent, a stockbroker with sweat beading across his forehead, fumbled nervously. The spectators burst into applause, feeding Faisal's ego. In that same room, Marcus entered quietly. He wasn't dressed for such a place, and he knew it. His shirt, though freshly ironed, bore faint signs of wear, and his shoes were the same pair he wore to school, scuffed from long walks. He had come to wait for his mother, who was finishing a late shift cleaning the upper floors. Marcus kept to the edges of the lounge, hoping to remain unnoticed, but fate has a way of placing the quiet into the center of noise. Faisal's gaze fell on him. A smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. "Well, look who we have here," Faisal said loudly, making sure his voice carried across the room. "The maid's boy has arrived." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus stiffened, but didn't look away. His first instinct was to retreat, but retreating had never sat well with him. "Tell me," Faisal continued, his tone dripping with mockery, "have you come to serve drinks or maybe polish the chessboard? Careful with it. It's worth more than your entire apartment." More laughter followed, sharper this time. Marcus felt the sting of humiliation rising in his chest. He remembered the echoes of playground taunts, the sting of classmates laughing at his clothes, the pitying stares when his mother picked him up in her maid's uniform. Yet something inside him refused to bend. He stepped closer to the table, his voice steady. "I can beat you in chess." The words dropped like stones into water. Silence swallowed the room for a single breath, then laughter roared back louder than before. Men slapped their thighs. A woman whispered, "Is he serious?" The stockbroker, grateful that attention had shifted away, chuckled nervously. Faisal leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "You? Beat me? Do you even know the rules, boy?" Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I know enough." The simplicity of his answer unsettled the room. Some spectators leaned in, sensing that the moment had shifted from comedy to challenge. Even Faisal's grin faltered for the briefest second before he masked it with another loud laugh. "Very well," Faisal said, snapping his fingers at the empty chair across from him. "Sit. Let's see this miracle." "Let's all watch the maid's son try to outthink me." A few murmurs rippled among the guests. Some smirked, expecting an easy humiliation. Others raised eyebrows, curious to see if this boy carried something more than naive confidence. Marcus slid into the chair. His mother, Evelyn, appeared at the edge of the room, her face pale with worry. She caught his arm and whispered, "Marcus, don't. Please. This isn't your fight." He turned to her, his voice low, calm. "It's already mine, Mom." The guests chuckled again, eager for the spectacle. To them, it was entertainment. To Marcus, it was something different. This was not about beating a millionaire at a board game. This was about dignity, about showing that arrogance could be met with quiet defiance. And as the first pieces were placed on the board, the air in the lounge shifted. The noise softened into a hum of anticipation. Eyes fixed on the board, waiting for the opening moves. The collision had begun, and no one could look away. The pieces were arranged neatly on the marble board, their polished surfaces reflecting the golden glow of the Sterling Club's chandeliers. Marcus sat across from Faisal, his posture calm, his hands resting lightly on his knees. Around them a half-circle of spectators leaned in, anticipation mixing with amusement. They weren't here to witness a fair contest. They were here to watch a young man be ridiculed. Faisal leaned back in his chair, flashing his signature grin. "Look at him," he announced to the crowd, his voice carrying across the room. "The son of a maid, sitting at my table as if he belongs here. Tell me, boy, have you ever played on a board like this? These pieces are ivory imported from Italy. They cost more than your rent for an entire year." Laughter exploded again. Marcus didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the board, his breathing steady. "Maybe he thinks chess is like checkers," another man chimed in, sipping from his glass. "Careful, boy, the knights don't hop over like that." The jeering built momentum. A woman with diamonds around her neck added, "It's adorable, really. He's so serious. He must think brains aren't tied to background." Evelyn stood by the door, her hands clasped tightly, torn between pulling her son away and respecting the unshakable resolve in his expression. Her heart pounded with fear. Fear that he would be humiliated, fear that this moment would leave scars deeper than any insult from schoolyard bullies. Faisal smirked, savoring the tension. He picked up a pawn and rolled it between his fingers. "Let me teach you something before we begin," he said. "Chess is about power. It's about crushing your opponent until he admits he doesn't belong on the board, just like in life. Men like me command. Men like you serve. That's how the world works." Marcus raised his eyes at last, meeting Faisal's glare. His voice came low but clear. "Then maybe your world needs a new rule. The room fell silent for a breath. Some spectators shifted uncomfortably, others smirked, eager to see Faisal's reaction. The millionaire chuckled, shaking his head. Bold words from someone who's about to be my entertainment. Fine, let's play. I'll give you white, you'll need the first move. But before Marcus could reach for a pawn, more mockery rained down. Make sure he knows how the pieces move, someone joked. Should we fetch a children's book? Another added. He'll last 5 moves, maybe 6, said the broker who had lost earlier, desperate to reclaim dignity by belittling someone else. The crowd's cruelty pressed heavily, but Marcus let it wash over him. Inside, he recalled his grandfather's voice. Every mistake teaches you how to win later. This wasn't the first time he had been underestimated. It wouldn't be the last. Evelyn whispered urgently. Marcus, please, let's go home. Her voice trembled, carrying both love and fear. He turned slightly toward her, softening his expression. Mom, trust me, I know what I'm doing. Her breath caught, torn between pride and worry. She nodded faintly, stepping back though her eyes never left him. Faisal slammed his pawn onto the board with exaggerated force. Enough delay. Make your move, boy. Show us how the Maid son plans to topple a king. The spectators leaned closer, eyes hungry for humiliation, laughter simmering just beneath the surface. They expected Marcus to falter, to hesitate, to crumble under the pressure. But Marcus's hands didn't tremble. He reached forward, touched the pawn before him, and slid it into place with quiet confidence. The laughter faltered for the briefest moment. There was nothing dramatic about the move, nothing reckless. It was steady, deliberate, the kind of move that suggested patience rather than fear. And in that moment, though the mockery still lingered in the air, a subtle shift occurred. Some who had come only to laugh now leaned in closer, curiosity replacing ridicule. Something about the calm in Marcus's eyes unsettled the script they had all expected. The jeers hadn't broken him. If anything, they had sharpened his resolve. The game had only just begun. The first pawn had moved, and with it, the atmosphere inside the Sterling Club shifted. The mocking laughter hadn't vanished entirely, but it softened, replaced by a strange anticipation. Something about Marcus's calm unnerved those watching. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't trembled. He had simply played. Faisal chuckled, trying to reclaim control of the moment. He snatched his own pawn and slammed it forward with unnecessary force. There, now we're even, he announced. The crowd laughed obediently, though their eyes stayed glued to the board. Marcus didn't look up. He studied the position, his mind ticking through possibilities the way it always had. He remembered the long evenings at the community center, his grandfather whispering, "Patience, Marcus. Don't chase victory. Let it come to you." He moved another pawn forward, measured and precise. His opponent, however, seemed less interested in strategy than spectacle. Faisal leaned back in his chair, spinning his knight in the air before dropping it onto the board with a flourish. "Did you see that?" he asked the audience, who clapped politely. Inside, Marcus noted the sloppiness. Faisal's knight wasn't badly placed, but it carried no clear purpose. Marcus pressed his lips together, hiding the flicker of confidence that sparked inside him. Around the table, spectators whispered, "He's taking this seriously," one murmured, referring to Marcus. "Doesn't matter," another replied. "Faisal will crush him." Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, her fingers clenched together so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Every move her son made felt like a heartbeat inside her chest. She wanted to drag him away, yet she also saw something she hadn't expected, calm defiance, a confidence she couldn't quite explain. The opening continued. Marcus built his position slowly, methodically. Pawns crept forward like soldiers securing ground. His bishop slipped diagonally, aiming quietly at the heart of Faisal's setup. Each move was deliberate, restrained. Faisal, by contrast, attacked with bravado. He pushed pawns recklessly, swung his queen too early, and flashed grins at the audience whenever he captured a minor piece. "Another step closer to victory," he declared, as though the game were already decided. Marcus watched carefully, letting the arrogance unfold. He remembered something his mentor, Mr. Reynolds, had once told him. The overconfident opponent is the easiest to defeat. He defeats himself. Midway through the opening, Faisal leaned forward, grinning. "Tell me, boy, what will you do when I crush you in front of all these people? Will you run back to your little apartment and cry on your mother's lap?" The room burst into cruel laughter. Marcus finally raised his head, meeting Faisal's gaze directly. His voice was steady. "I don't play to impress them. I play to win." The words drew another round of laughter, but this time not everyone joined. A few spectators tilted their heads, sensing something brewing. The boy's calmness didn't match the setting. His confidence didn't feel like arrogance. The game pressed on. Faisal's aggressive style created early tension, forcing Marcus into a defensive position. Pieces pressed against his side of the board, and whispers grew louder. "He's trapped already," one man said. "5 more moves at most," another added. Evelyn's chest tightened. She could barely watch, her heart pounding in her ears. She whispered under her breath, "Please, Marcus, just don't let them break you." But Marcus's eyes never left the board. He wasn't rattled. He saw the imbalance in Faisal's attacks, the careless placement of pawns, the queen exposed too soon. His defense was solid, his patience unshaken. Still, to the onlookers, it looked as though Faisal had the upper hand. His rooks loomed, his pawns advanced, his queen threatened Marcus's king. Faisal leaned back, smugness radiating. "See? This is what happens when pawns pretend to be kings." Marcus let the words pass through him. He adjusted in silence, setting the stage for something none of them expected. The match had only just begun, but already it was clear. This wasn't going to be the easy humiliation Faisal had promised. Faisal's pieces pressed aggressively across the board, the ivory gleaming under the lights. To the untrained eye, he looked unstoppable. His pawns had advanced far, his rooks dominated open files, and his queen hovered menacingly, daring Marcus to falter. The spectators leaned forward, their murmurs laced with satisfaction. "He's cornered already," one man whispered, sipping his drink. "Didn't I say? 5 moves and he's finished," another replied confidently. Faisal smirked, basking in their approval. He moved his queen with a sharp snap, placing Marcus's knight under threat. "There," he declared, his voice carrying. "One by one your little soldiers fall." The crowd chuckled. Marcus calmly picked up the knight, studied the position and let it go. He moved a pawn instead, protecting what he could, holding his ground. To outsiders it looked desperate, like patching a sinking ship with bare hands. But inside Marcus's thoughts raced, not with panic but with calculation. He remembered his grandfather's words. "Defense is not weakness, Marcus. It's the patience before the storm." Still, the tension weighed on him. Faisal's attacks kept coming, fast and reckless, giving the illusion of dominance. Marcus lost a bishop to a flashy combination. Gasps filled the room, followed by gleeful laughter. "Ah!" Faisal exclaimed, leaning back in triumph. "First blood!" "Did you see that? He didn't even notice the trap." Marcus inhaled slowly, forcing calm into his chest. He had noticed the trap. He had simply chosen a different path, but the crowd couldn't see that yet. His loss looked like incompetence, and the humiliation in the laughter was sharp. Evelyn's hands shook where she stood, her lips pressed tight as if to keep back tears. "Marcus," she whispered under her breath, "don't let them crush you." The stockbroker, who had earlier lost to Faisal, leaned toward a friend and muttered, "At least I lasted longer than this kid will." He smirked, clinging to the scraps of dignity Marcus's struggle provided him. Meanwhile, Faisal's confidence soared. Every captured piece was paraded like a trophy. He lifted Marcus's bishop high before setting it down beside the board, grinning at his audience. Another one gone. How many pieces will he lose before he realizes this isn't his world? Marcus glanced at his remaining pieces. His side of the board looked crowded, defensive, nearly suffocated by Faisal's overextended army. To most it appeared hopeless. But Marcus saw something else. Small cracks forming in the reckless aggression, lines of weakness hidden beneath the showmanship. He pushed another pawn forward, subtly shifting the balance. The move was quiet, almost invisible to the crowd, but it steadied his position. "Coward's play," Faisal mocked. Afraid to fight, so you crawl behind pawns?" Marcus didn't answer. He let the words roll off, focusing instead on the board. Each insult fueled his patience, each jeer sharpening his concentration. He wasn't here to win their approval, he was here to win the game. The match stretched on. Marcus lost another pawn, then a rook. Gasps turned to chuckles, chuckles to mocking applause. "This is embarrassing," one man said loudly. "He should resign before it gets uglier." But Marcus didn't resign. His eyes stayed fixed, his breathing even. He saw beyond the immediate losses, beyond the showy sacrifices Faisal celebrated. He saw the dangerous position Faisal's queen had wandered into. The rooks cut off from one another, the pawns advanced too far to retreat. Faisal, blinded by arrogance, mistook silence for surrender. "Do you see?" he told the room. "This is the difference between men like me and boys like him. Some are born to command, others born to obey." The laughter returned, but faint unease flickered in a few faces. A handful of sharper observers noticed that Marcus wasn't unraveling as quickly as expected. His defenses, though battered, were intact. His losses seemed chosen rather than accidental. Evelyn's heart pounded painfully. She wanted to scream at the crowd to silence their cruelty, but she held back. Deep down, she saw something in her son's eyes, a calm that didn't match the board's apparent chaos. The room believed Faisal was winning easily, but Marcus knew the truth. The advantage was not as secure as it looked. The storm was building. The board looked bleak for Marcus. His rook was gone. One bishop captured, pawns scattered like broken soldiers. To the crowd it was over. They leaned closer, drinks in hand, ready to witness the humiliation they had been promised. Faisal thrived on the energy, his smile wide, his voice booming. "You see," he declared, lifting his glass before placing another piece forward with theatrical flair, "this is how power works. You push, you take, you dominate. The weak fold." The laughter that followed was sharp, biting. Marcus didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the board, scanning the lines, memorizing the shape of the chaos Faisal had created. Because hidden inside the recklessness, Marcus saw something, a weakness. It was subtle, invisible to those who watched casually. But to Marcus, every pawn pushed too far, every rook left uncoordinated, every queen wandering too eagerly. It all screamed opportunity. His heart thudded once in his chest, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the opening he had been waiting for. He moved a knight, quiet and deliberate. To the crowd it looked pointless. "He's just stalling," someone whispered. But Marcus knew the truth. The knight's placement set the first brick in a trap. Faisal barked out a laugh. That's your move? A child could play better?" He shoved his queen deeper into Marcus's side of the board, overextending with arrogance. Cheers erupted, but a few faces in the crowd began to shift. They leaned closer, puzzled by Marcus's calm. Marcus responded with another quiet move, sacrificing a pawn. Gasps followed. "He's throwing pieces away now," a woman sneered. Faisal laughed even louder, banging the table with his hand. "Pathetic. He offers me gifts, as if surrender can come dressed as strategy." But Marcus saw further. That sacrificed pawn had forced Faisal's knight into a vulnerable square, one where it had no support. Another move, another sacrifice, and suddenly Faisal's position looked slightly less perfect. The cracks widened. Evelyn, standing at the edge, clutched her chest. She didn't understand the details, but she felt the rhythm change. Marcus's movements no longer looked desperate, they looked intentional. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Hold on, baby." "Just hold on." Piece by piece, Marcus tightened the noose. He offered another apparent blunder, a bishop seemingly left unguarded. Faisal snatched it with greedy hands, announcing, "Another trophy for me." But when Marcus's rook slid across the board with precision, the room went silent. The bishop had been bait, and Faisal had walked straight into the trap. For the first time, his grin faltered. He stared at the board, blinking. His queen was suddenly threatened, boxed in by pieces he had ignored in his rush for glory. He scrambled, moving a pawn to cover, but in doing so, left another weakness behind. Marcus struck again, calm as ever. His knight leapt into position, cutting off escape. The spectators leaned forward, whispers rising. Wait, did he plan that? No, impossible. He's just lucky. Look at Faisal's queen, it's cornered. Faisal's face reddened. He moved faster now, less showmanship, more desperation. His earlier arrogance cracked under the weight of pressure. He muttered curses under his breath, something he had never done in front of his polished audience. Marcus made no speeches, no gestures. He played. His moves were clean, logical, building momentum with every step. The trap tightened like a snare. Then it happened. A single exchange flipped the entire board. Marcus sacrificed a rook, drawing Faisal's queen out of position. Gasps erupted. He's lost again! But when Marcus slid his bishop into place, the room froze. Faisal's queen had nowhere left to run. Silence. Then a voice in the back whispered, "He's about to lose her." Faisal's jaw clenched. His queen, his pride, his symbol of dominance, was gone in the very next move. The spectators gasped, stunned, as Marcus captured it cleanly. The momentum had shifted. The arrogance that had filled the room only minutes earlier now hung heavy as doubt. And for the first time that night, Faisal looked uncertain. The sound of ivory striking marble echoed louder than the chatter of the crowd. Marcus's bishop claimed Faisal's queen, and with that single move, the balance of power shifted. The room, once filled with laughter, now buzzed with disbelief. A silence stretched across the lounge, broken only by scattered whispers. "He took the queen," someone muttered, their voice tinged with awe. "That was no accident," another said, eyes wide. Faisal stared at the board, his grin gone. The confidence that had colored every gesture drained from his face. He tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "Lucky," he muttered, adjusting his tie. "Even fools stumble onto fortune sometimes." Marcus didn't respond. His focus was absolute, his eyes scanning the board, already seeing moves ahead. He didn't need words. The pieces spoke for him. His knight leapt into a commanding position, his rook lined up with precision. Slowly, steadily, the tide was turning. The spectators leaned closer, their earlier mockery replaced by curiosity. Some even exchanged glances, silently admitting that what they were watching was no fluke. Marcus wasn't surviving anymore. He was taking control. Faisal pushed a pawn aggressively, desperate to regain momentum. "You think you've won something?" he sneered, forcing bravado back into his voice. "This game is far from over." Marcus moved his rook, calm and unshaken. His voice came low, almost a whisper, but clear enough to be heard by those nearest. "It's only just beginning." The words carried weight. Even Evelyn, standing near the back, felt a chill run through her. She had feared humiliation, yet now her son looked untouchable, his calm radiating strength she hadn't realized he possessed. Move by move, Marcus dismantled the reckless structure Faisal had built. Every overextended pawn became a target. Every isolated rook grew vulnerable. Where Faisal had charged forward without caution, Marcus now swept through with precision. The crowd erupted in gasps when Marcus's knight forked two of Faisal's pieces. Cheers followed when he captured a rook, though they weren't for Faisal anymore. They were for Marcus, the boy who wasn't supposed to last 5 moves, the boy who had been mocked before even touching the board. Faisal's face grew redder with each loss. He slammed pieces down, muttering curses, his polished composure unraveling. "This is nonsense," he barked. "A trick, nothing more." But the board betrayed him. His king, once safely shielded, now looked exposed. His pawns, scattered and weak, offered little protection. He shifted in his chair, pulling at his collar, as though the air had grown too thick. Marcus remained steady. His moves were deliberate, quiet, unhurried. He didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't seek the crowd's approval. He played with the same discipline he had practiced for years in quiet kitchens and community halls. The audience noticed. "Look at him," one whispered. "He's not nervous at all." "It's like he knew this was coming," another replied. Even those who had laughed the loudest earlier now fell silent, their eyes wide with respect. A few began to root quietly for Marcus, though they didn't dare say it aloud. The balance of the room was shifting as surely as the balance on the board. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She pressed a hand over her mouth, her heart aching with pride. This was her son, the boy she had raised alone, the boy who had carried her sacrifices into every step of his journey. And here he was, showing the world his worth without a single boast. Faisal grew reckless. He lunged with his remaining rook, hoping to strike back, but Marcus anticipated it. A quiet exchange later, the rook was gone. The millionaire's face twisted, his confidence crumbling before dozens of watchful eyes. Marcus leaned slightly forward, his voice calm. "It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish." The words landed heavier than any insult Faisal had thrown earlier. The crowd, once entertained by arrogance, now leaned into silence, waiting for what would come next. Marcus had seized control. The match was no longer a spectacle of humiliation. It was a lesson, one unfolding move by move, and Faisal was the unwilling student. The Sterling Club, once filled with smug laughter, now pulsed with a different energy. The murmurs had shifted tone. No one mocked Marcus anymore. Eyes followed every move he made, breaths held in anticipation. And at the center of it all sat Faisal, his polished mask of arrogance cracking piece by piece. He stared at the board as though it had betrayed him. His queen was gone, his rooks scattered, and his king dangerously exposed. Sweat beaded along his hairline, though he tried to hide it by loosening his collar. His hand hovered over a pawn, then a rook, then back again, uncertain for the first time all evening. Marcus waited. His calmness was unnerving. He sat still, eyes sharp, his breathing even. It was Faisal who fidgeted, Faisal who struggled. The roles had reversed, though the millionaire refused to admit it. "Do you think this means anything?" Faisal snapped suddenly, his voice louder than it needed to be. "You had a few lucky moves, that's all. The outcome won't change." Marcus didn't respond. He slid a rook across the board with precision, placing Faisal under even more pressure. The crowd gasped. "He's cornering the king," someone whispered. Faisal's jaw tightened. He slammed his pawn forward, a desperate attempt to block. It wasn't strategy, it was survival. Marcus immediately countered, his knight leaping into place, slicing deeper into Faisal's defense. "Impossible," Faisal muttered under his breath. This isn't possible." For years, no one had dared to challenge him. Even in games of skill, opponents softened their blows, letting him walk away with victory intact. But Marcus wasn't interested in stroking his ego. He was there to play, and Faisal was realizing, painfully, that he wasn't ready for a real fight. "Calm down," one of his entourage whispered nervously. "It's just a game." Faisal turned sharply, his glare silencing the man. "Shut up." "I don't lose." But he was losing, and everyone in the room could see it. Marcus advanced again, his moves methodical, his traps tightening like a net. Each piece he played seemed to predict Faisal's panicked replies, steering the game toward an inevitable conclusion. The spectators whispered in awe. "He's dismantling him. Look at the boy's control. It's like he's 5 steps ahead." Faisal's hands shook slightly as he grabbed a rook, slamming it down harder than necessary. The sound echoed like frustration given form. Marcus barely blinked. He answered with a bishop striking cleanly, forcing Faisal into yet another corner. "No," Faisal growled, his voice cracking with strain. "No, this isn't happening." He raked a hand through his hair, the polished composure gone, his tone less the confident prince of wealth and more the petulant child who couldn't stand being denied. Evelyn watched with tears forming in her eyes. She had feared for her son's humiliation, but now she saw something else, Faisal unraveling Marcus steady. Her heart swelled with pride so fierce it left her breathless. Marcus finally spoke, his words soft but sharp. "You underestimated me. That was your mistake." The phrase cut deeper than any captured piece. Faisal's lips curled, but he had no reply. He moved another pawn blindly, trying to claw back ground he had already lost. Marcus countered without hesitation, placing his knight with surgical precision. Gasps echoed again. Faisal's king was nearly cornered. The once booming room was now a theater of tension, every spectator caught between disbelief and exhilaration. Faisal slammed his fist lightly against the table. "You don't belong here," he hissed, more to himself than to Marcus. "You're nobody." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze unshaken. "Tonight it's not about who I am, it's about the board. And here we're equals." The silence that followed was deafening. No insult, no sneer, no display of wealth could break that truth. The board didn't care about riches or titles, it cared about moves, and Marcus was making all the right ones. Faisal's desperation grew with every passing second. He shifted in his chair, sweat dampening his brow, muttering calculations under his breath, but the path before him narrowed with every move. The game was slipping through his fingers, and nothing, not arrogance, not money, not mockery, could save him now. The board had become a battlefield stripped of illusions. Faisal's pieces were scattered, his defenses cracked wide open. He leaned forward, eyes darting across the squares, searching desperately for an escape. But no matter how he studied the position, the truth loomed larger with every second. His king was trapped. Marcus moved with quiet certainty. He didn't rush, didn't gloat, didn't even glance at the spectators whose eyes were now glued to him. Each piece he slid forward was deliberate, like steps on a path he had walked many times before. Faisal, on the other hand, grew more frantic. His voice rose with each move. "I can still turn this around," he insisted, though his tone betrayed him. He grabbed a pawn and shoved it forward, more out of anger than strategy. Marcus calmly repositioned his rook, cutting off another line of escape. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "He's cornering him." "It's almost over." "Look at Faisal's face. He knows." Faisal's hand trembled as he touched his remaining rook. He slammed it into place, his knuckles whitening against the polished wood of the table. But even before his fingers left the piece, Marcus's bishop glided forward, locking the king into an even tighter prison. The spectators gasped. Evelyn clasped her hands to her chest, hardly breathing. Her son was on the verge of doing the impossible. Faisal's composure shattered. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head, his polished arrogance unraveling in front of everyone. "No, no, this isn't real." His eyes darted around, looking for reassurance, but the crowd offered none. They had turned. Their smiles no longer encouraged him. Their silence weighed like judgment. Marcus leaned slightly forward, his voice calm and steady. "You're running out of moves." The words stung worse than any insult Faisal had thrown earlier. He snapped back, his voice raw. "Shut up, just play." Marcus obliged. His rook slid across the board, landing with precision. The path was set. There was only one destination left. Faisal scrambled, shifting his king one square over, clinging to the hope of survival. But Marcus had already foreseen it. His knight leapt into position, cutting off the last avenue of escape. The room froze. No one breathed. All eyes locked on Marcus as he placed his hand gently on his queen, sliding it into place with a finality that echoed louder than any shout. "Checkmate." The word hung in the air like thunder. Silence fell across the Sterling Club. Glasses stopped mid-air. Conversations died in throats. The only sound was the faint clink of the captured pieces resting in a pile beside the board. Faisal's face drained of color. He stared at the board, unable to process what had just happened. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. The room that had once cheered his arrogance now looked at him with quiet disbelief. Then the whispers began. He lost. He actually lost. The boy beat him. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed by pride. For so long she had feared her son would be crushed by humiliation, but here he was, calm, victorious, proving his worth before the very people who had mocked him. Marcus didn't celebrate. He didn't raise his fists or bask in the shock of the crowd. He simply leaned back, his gaze steady, his breathing calm. To him, the victory was not about glory, but about dignity. Faisal finally found his voice, though it shook. "This means nothing," he said, forcing out the words. "A fluke. That's all." But his eyes betrayed him. He knew it wasn't luck. He had been outplayed, exposed, beaten at his own game. Marcus stood, his voice quiet yet firm. It wasn't luck. It was chess. The crowd erupted, not in laughter but in applause. Some clapped hesitantly, others with genuine admiration. What began as scattered approval grew into a wave of respect, filling the room with thunder Marcus had earned piece by piece. Faisal sat frozen, his pride shattered in front of everyone who once fed it. The checkmate wasn't just on the board, it was in the air in the silence that followed, in the respect Marcus had claimed for himself. The boy who had been mocked as a maid's son had just defeated a millionaire before the eyes of the powerful, and nothing would ever erase it. For several long seconds after Marcus's quiet declaration of checkmate, the Sterling Club remained suspended in silence. The board lay frozen, the captured queen sitting among the fallen like a crown stripped from its throne. All eyes were fixed on the boy who had come from nothing, and the millionaire who had just been humbled. It was Evelyn who broke the silence first. A shaky breath escaped her lips, her hands trembling as tears slipped down her cheeks. Pride filled her chest so strongly it nearly hurt. She had spent her life polishing the worlds of others, invisible in the grand homes she cleaned. Now her son stood tall in one of those worlds, not by invitation but by merit. The crowd stirred. Applause began softly, hesitant at first, as though the spectators were unsure whether it was appropriate to acknowledge what had just happened. But the clapping grew, spreading from one guest to another, until the room filled with genuine thunder. The same people who had laughed at Marcus minutes earlier now looked at him with respect. One man leaned toward another and whispered, "That wasn't luck. The kid played brilliantly." Another nodded, shaking his head in disbelief. He planned it. Every sacrifice, every move, it was deliberate. Marcus, still seated, didn't bask in their praise. He folded his hands calmly, his face composed. For him, victory wasn't about their approval. It was about proving to himself, to his mother, and perhaps even to his late grandfather, that discipline and patience could overcome arrogance and privilege. Faisal, however, sat in stunned silence. His lips trembled as he tried to form words, but none came. The cheers around him burned hotter than any insult. For a man who thrived on dominance, this public defeat was unbearable. His hands tightened into fists, his knuckles pale, his gaze fixed downward on the board that had betrayed him. Finally, he forced out words through clenched teeth. It was a mistake. A trick. His voice was hollow, unconvincing even to himself. Marcus rose slowly from his chair. His voice was calm, respectful, but unyielding. "It wasn't a trick. It was chess. You underestimated me and the board punished you for it." The words, spoken without arrogance, struck like thunder. The crowd fell silent again, then erupted into louder applause. People rose to their feet, clapping not just for Marcus's skill, but for the dignity with which he carried himself. Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes shining. She whispered, "I'm proud of you, baby," her voice trembling with joy. Marcus glanced at her, a faint smile softening his serious expression. For him, that moment mattered more than any applause. Faisal pushed his chair back suddenly, the legs screeching against the polished floor. "Enough," he snapped, his voice sharp, though it wavered with humiliation. "This means nothing. Do you hear me?" "Nothing!" He stormed toward the exit, his entourage scrambling after him, their faces pale with discomfort. The once proud millionaire left the club in disgrace, his arrogance shattered, his reputation bruised in front of everyone who mattered to him. The room lingered in the aftermath. People approached Marcus cautiously, their earlier condescension gone. A man in a grey suit extended his hand. "Young man, that was extraordinary. Have you considered entering professional tournaments?" Marcus shook his hand politely but said little. Another woman added, "Your composure, remarkable. Truly remarkable." Evelyn watched all of it with quiet awe. She had always believed in her son's talent, but seeing others recognize it, seeing doors begin to crack open for him, it felt like the weight of years of labor lifting, if only slightly. As the applause faded, Marcus gathered the pieces back into their proper places. He didn't need trophies or cheers. The simple order of the board restored after battle was enough. Yet deep inside he knew something had shifted. The night wasn't just about defeating Faisal. It was about being seen, about breaking the barrier that had always kept him in the shadows. The club had witnessed his victory, and nothing would ever erase what they had seen. The night after the match, Marcus couldn't sleep. The echoes of the applause still rang in his ears, but louder than that was the memory of his mother's voice whispering, "I'm proud of you, baby." For years, he had dreamed of proving himself, of stepping beyond the invisible walls people built around him. Now, for the first time, he felt those walls beginning to crack. The following week, the ripple of his victory spread quietly through the Sterling Club's circles. Men who had once ignored him now remembered his name. Whispers carried from one room to another about the boy who had humbled Faisal al-Hariri, the millionaire who never lost. At first, Marcus thought little of it. To him, it had been a single game, nothing more, but others saw it differently. One evening, a man in a tailored grey suit approached him as he waited for his mother outside the club. He introduced himself as Richard Collins, a corporate lawyer and an avid chess supporter. "Young man," Collins said, shaking Marcus's hand firmly, "what I witnessed last week was more than a game. It was control, vision. Have you considered playing competitively? Tournaments, perhaps even beyond the local level?" Marcus hesitated. "I've played in community events, but I don't have the resources." Collins smiled knowingly. "Resources can be arranged when talent is undeniable, and your talent is undeniable." The words sank deep. Marcus had heard praise before from his grandfather, from his mother, from mentors at the community center. But to hear it from a man like Collins, in a place where Marcus had always been treated as invisible, it felt different. Within days, more people reached out. An older woman named Margaret, who had quietly watched the match from the back, invited Marcus to her library's private chess circle. A retired banker offered to sponsor his entrance into state-level competitions. Even strangers on the street, who had heard rumors, stopped him to say, "You're the kid who beat the millionaire, right?" Evelyn noticed the change, too. She would come home exhausted from long shifts and find Marcus studying, his focus sharper than ever. She sat beside him at the kitchen table one evening, running a hand gently over the wooden board his grandfather had left him. "You're going places, Marcus," she said softly. "I can feel it, and your grandfather would be so proud." Marcus looked at her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm going to make sure your sacrifices mean something, Mom. Every move I play, it's not just for me, it's for us." The weeks passed and Marcus entered tournaments he never imagined possible. In hotel ballrooms and civic centers, he faced opponents who had studied under grandmasters, who had trained with expensive software and coaches. Many of them glanced at him dismissively before the games, but their expressions changed quickly once the board came alive. Marcus's calm patience unsettled them. His ability to spot traps and create them turned matches on their heads. He didn't win them all, but each victory mattered more than the last. With each success, invitations grew. Newspapers began covering his games, dubbing him the prodigy from Queens. To some, he became a symbol of resilience, proof that talent could rise from the humblest beginnings. But through it all, Marcus remained grounded. He didn't forget the laughter in the Sterling Club, nor the sting of being called the Maid's boy. That memory stayed with him, not as bitterness, but as fuel. One evening, after a particularly grueling tournament, Mr. Reynolds found him sitting quietly with his notebook. The retired professor smiled, lowering himself into the chair beside him. "You've grown," Reynolds said. "But remember, this isn't just about winning games. It's about showing the world what patience and discipline can do." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand. It's bigger than me now." And deep inside, he knew Reynolds was right. His journey was no longer about proving himself to one arrogant millionaire. It was about carving a place in a world that had never expected him to belong. The doors were opening, and Marcus was ready to step through. Months after the night at the Sterling Club, Marcus Johnson stood in a hotel ballroom in downtown Manhattan, his hands resting lightly on the edge of another chessboard. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and his opponent, a seasoned national competitor, sat across from him, studying the young man who had captured the city's imagination. Marcus no longer blended into the background. His name was spoken with respect. Invitations to tournaments arrived weekly, some with offers of sponsorships that would have once seemed unimaginable. Yet, despite the new recognition, Marcus remained the same, calm, steady, grounded by the lessons of his grandfather and the sacrifices of his mother. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, her eyes filled with pride. She had spent decades scrubbing other people's lives into perfection, and now she could finally see her own son stepping into a world that once seemed closed to him. She thought of Samuel, the grandfather who had placed the first chessboard in Marcus's hands, and whispered silently, "He's done it. He's carrying your lessons forward." Even Mr. Reynolds, who had once told Marcus that champions think 10 moves ahead, now admitted he had underestimated the boy. After a tournament, he clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "You didn't just learn to think 10 moves ahead," he said with a smile. "You learned to see further than any of us expected." But Marcus never forgot where it began. When reporters asked about his defining moment, he didn't speak of trophies or rankings. Instead, he recalled the night at the Sterling Club when an arrogant millionaire had mocked him and the world expected his humiliation. "That night taught me something," Marcus told them. "People can underestimate you, laugh at you, try to define you by where you come from, but the board doesn't care. Life doesn't care. What matters is how you play, how you keep moving forward no matter the odds." The story spread beyond New York. Articles called him the quiet genius from Queens. Others labeled him the underdog who toppled privilege. But to Marcus, those titles mattered less than the look on his mother's face every time he played. That was his true victory. As for Faisal, his defeat lingered like a shadow. The Sterling Club never forgot the night he was beaten by the Maid's son. His arrogance dimmed, his entourage shrank, and though he still strutted in luxury, whispers followed him wherever he went. The humiliation was permanent, etched into the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. Marcus, however, carried no bitterness toward him. When asked once about Faisal, he simply said, "He was just another opponent." What mattered was proving that dignity beats arrogance. The path ahead wasn't easy. Professional chess demanded endless hours of study, grueling competition, and resilience. But Marcus had lived his entire life preparing for struggle. Every taunt in school, every night his mother worked late, every whispered doubt had hardened him into someone who wouldn't back down. On the eve of his first international tournament, Marcus sat at the same kitchen table where it had all begun. The old wooden board with its chipped pieces still waited there, as if reminding him of his roots. Evelyn poured him a cup of tea and sat across from him, her smile soft. "You've already won, Marcus," she said. "No matter what happens next, you've already shown the world who you are." He nodded, his hand brushing across the worn night. "I'm not stopping, Mom. Not until I've given back everything you gave me." That night, as he prepared for the battles ahead, Marcus knew his journey was far from over. But the boy who had once been mocked as a maid's son was no longer invisible. He was a competitor, a symbol, and above all a reminder that patience, resilience, and dignity can rewrite any story. And just like a chess match, life had taught him that sometimes you start as a pawn, but with courage you can reach the other side and become anything. So if you've followed Marcus's journey this far, remember this: greatness often begins in the most unexpected places. Don't let the world tell you where you belong. Keep pushing, keep moving, keep playing your game. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed. That way, you won't miss the next incredible story waiting to unfold. And if you're ready for more right now, click on the suggested video on your screen. The journey continues there.